a market, orphan market, down right around the corner from where they assemble for the ritual, what they call the Mummers Parade. And they used to do it in what they call blackface. Up until the good administration in 85.
Yeah, I remember.
Right? And then you'll see a statue of Tammany, her husband, with Aquila on his shoulder, right there. So that goes to the entry of 76 down there. But I'm just saying, there's a lot of history right there in Philadelphia.
Love and peace on this holy day. We're going to go over the mummers and the Moorish dance. This is in the Festival book by Janet E.C. Lincoln, 1926, page 5. The word Moor from the Latin Moris signified any person of dark complexion. The English settlers spoke of the American Indians as Moors. I repeat, the English settlers spoke of the American Indians as Moors. In some parts of England, the Moors or Saracens were styled gypsies, and the gypsies were styled Moors. It has been supposed that the Moorish dance, which it says Morris, but it's Moorish, was first brought into England in the time of Edward III, when John of Gaunt returned from Spain. It is said, too, that it came from Gaul, or even from the Flemings. It is possible that the dance may have originated from the Moors, as the name Morris from Morisco signifies. The May games of Robin Hood were nothing more than the Morris dance. However, it is more likely that the Robin Hood people were accompanied by the Moorish dancers and altogether entered into the spirit of the forest revel. There were beside the dancers May games, or more simple nature, being merely lively steps around the Maypole. The lads and lassies of the village also engaged in these games in lively measure. In the reign of Henry, the Moorish dancers were dressed in gilt leather and silver paper, and sometimes in coats of white spangled fustians. They had purses at their girdles. You hear that? They had purses at their girdles, which could be an herbal bag, and wore garters to which bells were attached. The bells were always worn by the more active characters, and the use of them is a great antiquity. They often wore these tinkling ornaments on their feet. The number of bells were from 20 to 40. Page 2. The mummers from the Abbot. This is referencing from the same sources. This is page 2, and this was the section right before the Moors. The mummers from the Abbot. These maskers hand in hand stood in a wild throng around the pole. Many were in the guise of wild animals, a monster ring. Others were dressed with headdresses that were wonderfully made, high and plumed. As you've seen the image of the mother, made of postboard covered with flowers, bugles, and colored streamers. The dresses were of figured material, with many ribbons, highly colored, pointed breeches, and gandy hose, shoulder knots, and sashes. And a few days ago, I found the clip where it was speaking of the veil that's used during Christian marriages is used from the Moors. There were the sword dancers carrying blunt swords, ready to enter into a series of combats resembling at times the sharpening of knives while passing through various dance steps. The yeomen called out, "Tune up your pipes, my boys." The music struck up, and way they went up the middle and down again, changed sides crisscrossy, heads bobbing and feet stomping. They mostly ignored the music. Their steps too were original. If there was little grace, there was much fun. It was very muscular mirth, which delighted to find vent in strong exercise. It was a loud-voiced, noisy, hobnailed mirth, which delighted in shouts and laughter, and snapping fingers and stamping with the heel. The appearance of the crowd was grotesque in the extreme. It was composed of men, women, and children, ludicrously disguised in various habits, and presenting groups equally diversified and grotesque. Here, one fellow with a horse head painted before him, and a tail behind him, and the whole covered with a long foot cloth, which was supposed to hide the body of the animal, ambled, pranced, and plunged as he performed the celebrated part of the hobby horse. St. George and the dragon appear in action. The dragon, a bear, a wolf, and one or two other animals. There was a group of outlaws with Robin Hood and a little John at their head. Children wore dress of aged people and tottered with crutch sticks in their hands. Page 8. The early American maypole. In early American history, we read of the rise and fall of the maypole. Gnawthorne, in his twice-told tale, tells us that they who danced around the maypole were to pour sunshine over New England's ragged hills and scatter flower seeds throughout the soil. But now remember, it says the early American maypole in early American history. So this spread, the Moors stuff spreads all over the earth. Never had the maypole been so decked as at sunset in Midsummer's Eve. At sunset, the venerated emblem was a lofty pine tree, but decked with brilliant hues and ribbons, golden flowers of the wilderness. The wreath of roses on the lowest green, roses, red and green, was later to be hung over the heads of the Lord and Lady of the May as a symbol of their flowery union, who at this merrymaking were to become partners for the dance of life, votaries of the maypole, cried with flower-decked priests. All day long have the woods echoed to your mirth. Be this your happiest. Up with your nimble spirits, ye Moorish dancers. And it's speaking of Moorish dancers again with this mummers parade. That's why Master Teacher, he probably read this 20 years ago, but he speaks of these things, but he don't get into the details because he got to keep speaking the same elementary statements to everybody because they don't want to study. Page 8, the jester. There was a variety of jesters in ancient times. He was an eccentric character generally introduced in the Moorish dances for stage effect in any peculiar highly colored costume, sometimes with a cap or hood with long ears or horns, decorated with rows of bells and carried a bauble. And that's figure 5. That's what I'm showing. Sometimes over his right arm hung a cloth or handkerchief. He often tumbled and barked like a dog or mimicked the dancers, jesting and sporting about for the amusement of all. The piper. Those who dance must pay the piper. The piper wears the sword and feather and blows his pipes and tries to make music, though it is not the best. While doing this study, I also found the fiestas in Mexico, and it speaks of all these different festivals, over 37 of them that speaks of the Moors. And it also speaks of the mummer festivals, showing how all this stuff spread all over the world, down through the south, up through the north, or however it went. But this is what the elder meant when he said, go and cross-reference everything I'm saying. So then you can go here and find a lot more. Again, he could go over all of this already, but he has to keep repeating what he's been going over for years. When he speaks of the mummer parade and all of the different buildings and the different streets, he might have found a manuscript that's specifically speaking of the mummers parade with the Moors and the directions that they're walking and all of that, but he don't want to go over the reading because he knows you don't have a long attention span. But I would like to see it. He might have something that has a diagram. You never know. When I find great information, I can't help but come and share it, but I'm starting to see why. You just let others go off and do their own studies and stop trying to show everything. You know what I'm saying? As far as this maypole, I want to go further in and look at the rise and fall of the maypole and what that maypole is, the hawthorn and his twin-toed tails and all this craziness. This reading also referenced the pine tree being decorated and the wreath connected with the Moors and the mummers parade. So that's probably a reflection of what the generic Christian celebration is. I'll leave the link in the description. You can have the whole reading, but it gets into the Mary Mount was a settlement of Puritans, the American maypole of 1628, etc. I leave you in love and peace. Divine honors to Prophet Noble Drew Ali and the Moorish divine and national movement of the world. Have a good Holy Friday.